Hello, listeners, and welcome back to the Peggy Smedley Show. As always, I'm your host, Peggy Smedley. My first guest is back again to talk about AI and sustainability in manufacturing and energy. His team drives IR 4.0 and cutting edge technology deployments, leading the disruptive technology and innovation while also skilling the workforce for the ever changing workforce transformation. Before joining Microsoft, he led the Google Cloud Worldwide Edge and distributed artificial intelligence solutions. Please welcome back Walid Ali, artificial intelligence at Microsoft and manufacturing. Walid, welcome.
Oh, thank you. Pleasure being with you.
So, Walid, you and I have talked so many times about what's happening in the space, and I thought it would be really good before we get started again to kind of recap what we've been talking about at this point. So, I thought maybe it'd be good. Let's start off by talking about manufacturing in general. Maybe you could give kind of an update of where we were the last time, any new changes, because I know we've been talking about AI and manufacturing, but I thought maybe we should just start and give like a summary of what you think where things are at the state of manufacturing right now.
Oh, absolutely. And when it comes to manufacturing, especially where we are today and post COVID-19, it's yet adding more momentum, more tailwind to an already existing trend of empowering manufacturing manufacturers and manufacturing workforce to be able to lead to the next era of our demands. It's becoming so mundane on all of us now to support this disruption. It touches, as we've seen, unfortunately, over the past year, as we've seen, it touches every aspect on our life. And it's not missed on anyone, neither the enterprise, like the organization I belong to, the industrial coalitions like MXD or NAM or SESME, and or even the government and the federal agencies. We all learned about Biden's new executive order of reviewing the supply chain, which, by the way, has a lot to do with manufacturing in multi-segments of this manufacturing. So net, I see nothing but more momentum for us to accelerate and expedite our move forward to empower the industry and the stakeholders.
Do you think, with that in mind, when we look at the big picture, let's talk then about AI and manufacturing and then generally the workflow, because I think the impact on workflow really talks about that. Because I think when we think about employees, I think when we think about where we're headed, because when we get out of COVID, as you just talked about, it's not the same team, it's not the same tools, it's not the same processes, so things are a little different. We've had to learn different things, and now things are changing, and they're changing in a different way. So that workflow, how we go about it, is changing. Would you agree?
Oh, couldn't agree with you more. As a matter of fact, the workforce, as exactly as you eloquently put it, has been so drastically challenged with the disruption that happened with COVID-19 that now we're facing a demand for efficiency increase, a demand for better productivity, and the demand for also skilling the workforce, either the returning workforce or the new workforce that are entering into the new workspace. With all that, I see it really as enormous amount of opportunities for us to be able to hit multi birds with one stone, being able to address all these objectives at the same time, because it has dictated on all of us that disruption that is driving us back to the drawing board to come up with the most efficient methodology for achieving the best at the least cost with the most empowered workforce that we drive into the future. So understanding the skill gaps, understanding the challenges for the yet ever-growing automation and industry impediments of adapting AI, adapting data at scale, digitization, digital transformation. But with all of that, also the ability to empower our workforce, because we come back to what we learned from COVID-19. We have to empower our workforce, otherwise, no matter what we do, we're going to fall short from achieving our objectives.
Now, that's an interesting point, to empower our workforce, because we look at them, what are those things that we have to do? Because we went out of COVID, we've talked about this, you and I, that we just kind of ran out of our working environments. We all left and we weren't even prepared. We all went home and many of our plants shut down. There were key operations that continued. But when we look at this now, everything got disrupted. And now we're having to go back and look at our operations and say, how do we put them back in place, looking at it differently? So I guess the question would be is what are some of those manufacturing risks that exist when a key component has to kind of step up and look at what they were in the past to where they've got to be, look at operations when they were off schedule, because now they have to think about, look, we didn't do things the way we did it. And now if we don't do it a different way, our competition is just going to eat our lunch. So it's kind of like you got to think differently and you've got to think about digital transformation differently. And I think it's a challenge because you have to say, where do I start first?
Yes.
Going back with that skilled workforce that you just mentioned. And I kind of think it's not easy.
Well, nothing is easy at the beginning until you're going through it. Then you wonder, why haven't I done it a long time ago? So it could really be the blessing in disguise that we went through with the pandemic. In reality, we have had enormous assets in our disposal, but being able to align them properly, and exactly to your point, not to do the same thing twice, expecting a different outcome, because it's not going to happen, but being really able to align these multi-resources, including is an understatement. Workforce is a foundational pillar in any digital transformation. Being able to understand what are the opportunities to scale the existing workforce against the digital transformation requirements into the future. Understanding where our ecosystem, our supplier, our vendor, our vendor's ecosystem, the disruptions and risks, and also cyber risks associated with this enormous supply chain we rely on to produce anything, like even a small piece of electronics or a small device or even medicine. Being able to understand these implications on the digital transformation that tie into the workforce gaps. I really hate to say workforce gaps. I always say workforce opportunities, because with gaps comes opportunities to whoever would be able to address it successfully, to your point, against competition. And lastly, with this enormous amount of data and being able to decipher through it and come up with the best heuristics and methodologies and methods for achieving the end targets, it really shows the value of working the AI and data in a concise way to achieve all of that, including even the work that we can do for scaling the workforce, understanding where in a specific geo, in a specific industry, in a specific academia ecosystem, the tie-in between gaps, opportunities, and skill sets. And we see a lot of platforms that people are using today for achieving that. Of course, us at Microsoft, we're very proud of the LinkedIn platform that we have that is actually becoming a basis for people's career jogging, and which, by the way, ties very strongly to industry digital transformations, manufacturing ability to drive into the future.
So then that's a great segue. Where has manufacturing evolved then? I would ask the question, where were we 10 years ago to 5 years ago, 2 years ago, to where we are now, to where they have to go? Because I think, again, you just talked about data and metrics and KPIs, key performance indicators. I think the industry needs to understand if they don't track it, they're not going to survive. And if they haven't figured that out, they understand that, and they understand they have to cut cost. They have to improve inventory. They've got to improve the quality. There's a lot of moving parts right now, and they've had to look at what they've done in the past to where they have to be in the future. And again, that's where AI and IoT and all of these things and going to the cloud, where they've been traditionally within the four walls. They've done everything. Now they've got to push everything out. And you mentioned it, cybersecurity. So again, there's a lot of things going on that I think they have to consider. So those past this past decade has really changed very dramatically for them in disruption. So how do they envision that, whether they're, I know I'm throwing a lot out at you here, whether they're a small, medium, or a large company?
Yeah, I think great question. I think the best way to look at this is kind of contrasting the two pictures, what used to happen 10 or 20 years ago versus where we are today. And I think the best analogy is, I'm going to borrow your own phrase, understanding what the needs are from within the four walls that construct their own environment versus what they need from the construct of the global dependencies and the local ecosystem, transportation system, pricing, vendor supply availability, vendor risk, cost pressure, pricing opportunities, tons of other cues that used to be kind of dealt with on a simpler sheet with an internally driven focus now has to be externally driven focus with a really explosion of data. Where we see manufacturers are today is they know this is the premise where they have to succeed and drive their next opportunities in the future for them to be persistent in their success and their value creation, value proposition. Where they need to do more, and we're here to help, and we're very excited to be a part, as I said, of coalitions, enterprise, even government activities related to that, is the adoption of cloud and AI. The beauty of cloud is AI at scale, where you're not really hindered by the complexity of the problem because cloud is elastic in its nature and it allows you the ability to drive that as we do from our side at Microsoft, for example. But being able to tie your own criteria of success to these multi-criteria and multi-conditions, and in many times they are contradicting, and in many times being able to decipher through them requires what we call AI, and being able to really sniff through the best heuristic methodologies, risk associated with one path versus the other, jogging multi-path and coupling multi-strategies slash scenarios through AI and data. This is really where the opportunity, where we see the majority of those who are ready to really hockey stick after COVID-19 are getting ready to adapt. So where I see the opportunity for small and medium businesses for them to be able to catch up is adapting the ability to drive this evolutionary path with the right stakeholders. No one can succeed without understanding what are the dependencies between their vendor, their purchaser, their consumer, their channels, and also the understanding of their product risk, product timeline, whether it's a small or a medium or a large. With small and medium, the scope is quite different. So tying it in to the right players who have done it in the past, the real incumbents in the area of AI and cloud, would be the best conduit to help them lead forward into that next phase, as we've been doing and we're excited to continue doing in the future.
So when I hear you talk, it makes me think about the data-driven decisions that have to be made, and they have to be made with partners. So what I'm hearing you describe then is in the manufacturing environment, they're not alone, they're not on an island. Everything has to be made. When we talk about the supply chain, then they have to make rich decisions based on data-driven decisions with their partners in order to achieve successful supply chain decisions. So to be efficient, using the cloud, using AI, making this all happen. Are they doing that successfully? Are they doing it a little bit at a time? Or now, because everything got disrupted so fast, is their movement have to be disruption continuing to be as fast as it was in COVID in the past 12 months?
Yeah, well, definitely the disruption is enforcing a degree of agility that organizations have not witnessed for quite some time, to say the least. But in reality, everyone has been, this has not been missed on anyone thinking. But sometimes as you're kind of going with the inertia and driving your day-to-day operations and business processes, being able to adapt this disruption and innovation becomes almost orthogonal, at least perceived as almost orthogonal to your success. But with the disruption that we've seen with COVID-19, it became evident that no one can shy away from that. So to answer your question regarding where everyone is in that journey, it is really, it's a maturity journey, and different players occupy different places from this wave of maturity. Some of them are on the cutting edge, are on the leading edge. Some of them are adapting, ramping up. Some of them are readying themselves. What is extremely important is no matter where you are on the curve, you have to understand, and we're here again to help and work with all these different players in the ecosystem. One has to understand that the pressure for disruption and innovation has just got accelerated, and we expect this to continue in the coming few years as we come out of the COVID-19 episode that we all went through.
So we've talked about in manufacturers fear that AI is and I hate to say this, replacing employees, but it's not. We have to look at what that is. And let's talk about this upskilling, because manufacturers absolutely, if they want to stay competitive, need to kind of invest in technologies that invest in every step of that manufacturing process. We know this, and they need to understand that the tech that's going to help companies quickly see improvements that can be made in the processes, right? We understand that. Perhaps a better way to ask this is that what way can manufacturers kind of actually see or improve their vendor vulnerability, their upskilling of staff? I mean, those are vulnerabilities that they need to see in all of the stakeholders that they're working with, all of the collaboration. I mean, those are the things that are ultimately going to improve their profitability. It's going to improve everything they do, and it's going to do it quickly. How do we help them understand that?
Yeah, great question. As I said, I think it's becoming even clearer than ever before that the tie-in between digital transformation and success to meet the requirements of digital transformation would require empowering and skilling the workforce reskilling, rebuilding the workforce premises, empowering. I always use the word empowering the existing workforce because there are specific knowledge and amounts of know-how and information in the existing workforce. You cannot replace it by the smartest data support system. But in the meantime, being able to couple this known methods and know-how with automation and AI and being able to decipher huge amount of data beyond the comprehension of the human being, being able to couple them together is going to be crucial to adapting the workforce skilling. They go hand in hand, and one cannot replace the other. It's literally different pillars building the same foundation for us to be successful. But being able to tap into this would really require for us all in the manufacturing industry to be aware of where the trends are. And we should also utilize, as I said earlier, we should utilize enterprise. Great for the folks who are listening to our conversation today. They are getting that exposure, but we also have other coalitions, as I mentioned earlier, with MXD, with NEM, with Sesame. There is a huge amount of knowledge available for the public, for anyone in the manufacturing space, whether they are a member of the coalition or just browsing through the contributions of these coalitions. In addition to that, for every manufacturer, it's clear that there is a need for empowering or reskilling the workforce. One has to be scrappy in understanding how to fill these gaps. Bluntly, sometimes it's...
I love that. Yeah.
Sometimes it's courses offered in the community college where my factory floor and most of my workers are. Let's utilize that. Let's have the partnership. These are some of the few programs that we at Microsoft pride ourselves in driving, like Accelerate programs, where we tie in our contribution back to the society with key institutions, with key enterprises, with key governments, for us to empower the ecosystem, the population, for them to be able to address that challenge. It is really an open invitation for folks to understand what's available at their disposal for them to meet tomorrow's challenge.
Walid, we can't leave all of this without really talking about what's happening. We are now getting into a clean world. We have to have a clean environment. Let's talk about what manufacturers have to do to be more sustainable, because I think this is a very critical point or juncture in their whole world to make that transition. Some, maybe the larger ones, have been doing a little bit, trying to figure out emissions and the combination of sustainability, the AI and their impact on profitability. The smaller ones have to figure out how to do it. how do we get them to move that needle, so to speak, so they're a part of the game? Because they've got three scopes they've got to kind of do it, and Microsoft is leading the charge on this.
Yeah, we're very proud, actually, us from Microsoft side, we're very proud to have a very solid sustainability journey. But we also found out that not only us, but even Harvard studies, there is a huge correlation between adoption of sustainability and really business profitability. And being able to drive both is becoming a mandate for business success. It's not only because we want to be good citizens of the world and would like to help the environment, but it's really good for good business for us to have the sustainability constraint as we start building our own comeback after the events that we mentioned, after disruption. Circular economy, being able to drive the resources loop where market products, market resources, driving efficiency while reducing carbon emissions. At the end, all of this, when they get tied together, they drive actually business excellence and increase profitability in the long term. So as we're talking earlier, disruptions, there is always inertia to continue doing what you've done in the past. But if you don't disrupt yourself, you get disrupted. And that's the nature of evolutionary economy that we're seeing. Sustainability and AI and that overlapping area between what can be done versus what is easier to be done is something we have to always challenge ourselves so that we maintain long-term successes for our own business and our own environment.
Do we have to look at this also from the idea that right now, when we say it's not just good for the environment, but we've had 30 years since the Industrial Revolution thinking about all these things, thinking about, we've wanted this make, take, waste society. We've had all these products, but now we have to think about where are we going to put them in all these landfills. But now you have something to design it from the beginning. And the idea now as manufacturers, you can alter what you're doing. I mean, and when you do that, you have less waste, you have less production loss. I mean, can they understand that from a sustainable standpoint, that AI can show you that, can give you the insights that you didn't have? And that's where now you could see things, and you can use your team that you don't have as many people because you can upskill them to do other things. I mean, are we getting them to see that technology is giving us the insights to be able to understand some of that?
100%. I'll be more than happy to share with you, Peggy, for those who are listening to us, few pointers for them to look at some of these dashboards or matrix that will track actually the implication of adapting the sustainability strategy, the adoption of cleaner sourcing of material, cleaner understanding, the grading of vendors and the supply chain, consistency with its resiliency against sustainability, tying it all together, and that it has the environment scaling and ESG tools that many of these organizations, us at Microsoft and many other leading organizations in the world, are adapting. So that's where it comes back to the notion of data, because really comprehending that value will dictate on us understanding the dependencies, the ecosystem tie in to these dependencies, the supply chain, the vendor rating, the vendor risk against the ratings. We've seen it during COVID-19. You can always go to a specific manufacturer, but at the end, the material that again, masks or whatever, are not meeting the objectives, and it got tied in to poor sustainability targets. So usually being able to tie them together through this dashboard is really the ground truth for corporations, for companies, or for small businesses, for them to understand where they are going into the future. We at Microsoft, we're very happy to share our sustainability report, and we just shared it recently on our target for carbon neutrality, and also the tools, including the ESG and other dashboards that we're showing, measuring, and showing also the impact on business and the cost and or associated outcome upswing for business related to these adoptions. So definitely AI is the best tool to drive these dashboards and metrics as they comprehend all these different streams of information into the disposal of one dashboard at our disposal.
You know, Waleed, we're running out of time, and I had so many more questions to really talk about workforce readiness and our food and how we're doing everything. But just kind of summarize for us where you see AI, contributing right now in just our ecosystem, because right now we all have to think about what we leave future generations. We have to think about how we reinvent and use AI to help us build, create, produce a better world. And I think that's what you're striving for right now, is how we use it in so many other creative ways.
100%. And manufacturing starting to become, again, which is really great news for all of us, is becoming the backbone for all these new disruptions and innovations in our world, for us to have a sustainable world, for us to have the efficient farming, the enough production of food at scale. It really all ties in to the right manufacturing underlying mechanisms and tools and productions. We're very proud of our partnership with Corteva, for example, where they are leading the chart on how they are driving future farming products and how carbon control and nitrogen sequestration and building the right tools for farming. It is really building the right tools and equipments that is going to help us achieve this healthy and wealthy environment in the future. And guess what? When you scratch the surface underneath all these great disruption innovations, it's all data and AI that is driving that fulfillment. So I'm very excited to witness that, to have it as the part of my career, quite honestly, on my personal side. But for us all to be witnessing this new disruption, to be all parties in this new, almost a new revolution in the way we're thinking of our world and how manufacturing is driving us to achieve that. It's really great news for all of us. I'm very optimistic, and I cannot wait for tomorrow.
It's always exciting to talk to you. Walid Ali, artificial intelligence. It's manufacturing at Microsoft right there. Do I have that title right? At Microsoft. Thank you so much for spending so much time with us. Where can our listeners go to get more information on what you're doing?
We'll share a few pointers with you, but for sure, come to us on Microsoft side, and we'll have a few of these links for you to understand more about what we're doing with parties, with sustainability, and with AI. And it has been a pleasure being with you, Peggy.
Thank you so much. All right, listeners, that's all the time we have for this segment, but stick around. We've got more to come. Check out our website at connecttheworld.com or the Peggy Smedley Show. But most importantly, we want you to share your thoughts with us on social media, and on LinkedIn, or tweet at us at ConnectedWMag. Okay, this is the Peggy Smedley Show, the podcasting voice of IoT and digital transformation. And remember, with great technology comes great responsibility. We'll be right back after this quick commercial break.